Why did my ancestor change his name is a question that may come up more often than you might think in genealogical research. It's one of the most frustrating things to happen when you're researching your family tree, when you come across an ancestor who you suspect has changed his or her name. And it's not always easy to prove, and being naturally curious, we also would like to know the reason why. When we carry out research, we tend to imagine that our ancestors would give the same name every time there was a record to be filled in, such as on the census or on a marriage record, for example. Well, that would be nice and neat and tidy, but reality just isn't like that. Think about your own name and how you use it, or a friend or family member. My name, for example, is Rosamond Bott, but sometimes I might use my full name of Rosamond Elizabeth Jane Bott, or occasionally I might use the more informal name of Ros Bott. My father was born Ronald John Henry Bott, and in early years he was known as Ronnie, but when he became an actor he used his middle name of John, and he was known by the name of John Bott ever since. So it's no different with our ancestors. Sometimes a familiar, affectionate short name is used, say in the census, for example. So Lizzie perhaps instead of Elizabeth. And very often you'll find people using their middle names instead of a first name interchangeably. So when you're carrying out research, do remember this and make sure that you're looking at all possible permutations of a name. But that's first names. What about when the surname is changed? You might think there's a legal requirement to change a surname, but in fact there isn't now and there never has been. Anyone can change their name and start using it without the need for a deed poll. I've been recently researching a client's ancestor who was known by the surname of Strong, but was born with the surname Dunn. Now, luckily, we had evidence of this, but going back, my client had found that his father had also called himself Strong and used it in several documents. So, which was the actual surname? Well, it took me a while, but I was able to find, using dates, places and occupations that we already knew about, that Dunn was indeed the family surname, and it was not an easy search. A change in surname can cause a great deal of confusion in family history. This happened with my own grandfather, who was born in 1866. He had my mother very late in life. He was born Francis McEwen, but was adopted by his older sister and her husband when his parents died when he was 8. He took the name of his adoptive parents, Manley, but used both surnames interchangeably throughout his life until he married my grandmother. So here is my grandfather in the 1891 census, and here he is right at the bottom of the page. He was a railway clerk there. That's his first wife, Anne, and he says he was born in Hanley, Staffordshire. That's actually not true, but that's another story. Then 20 years later, still married to the same person, he is there as Francis McEwen, with 3 of the children from that first marriage. And there he is, railway clerk, shipping department, and still saying he was born in Hanley, Staffordshire. So, as you can see, he for some reason has gone back to his birth surname, even though he'd used his adoptive surname earlier. And later on, he again goes back to Manley. So when he married again, he used Manley again, and that's the surname my mother was born with. And it took a long time to work out what had happened. Why might someone have changed their name? Well, in my grandfather's case, I suppose he wanted to honour both his adoptive parents and his birth parents. In my client's ancestor's case, we don't really know. But I suspect that the change of surname was often to avoid something, either the law or possibly something like military call-up. And I rather think he called himself Strong just because he liked to think of himself being physically strong. As a mariner, he probably was. The thing is, there's rarely any documentary evidence for why someone might change their name, and all we can do is make guesses, and sometimes read between the lines of the available documents that we do have. In my experience, one of the main reasons for people changing their name is because they were adopted and took on the name of their adoptive parents. And you might find that that's a really good reason for looking for, possibly because the parents died early, or maybe they were just very poor and couldn't afford to keep several children. So very often what happened certainly in the Victorian and early 20th century, people would just foster out their children, and these children would then become part of the foster family, would take on the name of the foster family. So adoption is very often the reason why people had a change of name. And like my grandfather, if they got on well with their adoptive parents, they may have just swapped occasionally just to honour both sets of parents. So that's definitely something worth looking out for, especially if you find that the parents died young. It's certainly always worth searching the criminal records to see if a person might have had a previous criminal record, which might give them a reason to change their name later on. But other than that, we have very little to go on. Sometimes you might pick up that there was a name in the family. You can look at possibly a mother's maiden name that they might have taken on, particularly if they were illegitimate. So they might interchange between the mother's name and the possible father's name. Or you might pick up another family member's name that they have taken on for some reason. So if you do have an ancestor who seems to have disappeared from early records that they should be in, consider a possible change of name. One way of doing this is to search for the forenames only, with the exact place names, occupations and dates that you already know about. Just see what comes up. You might not always be able to prove it's the same person, but sometimes it might just spark off a new line of inquiry, and other clues might give you reason to think, that's him. I hope this has been helpful. Do leave me any comments and make sure that you are subscribed for further tips and information about family history research. Bye for now.